For 20 years, the paralysis held Ryota Ishikawa in its unyielding grip. It was a perfect cage, built of silence and stillness, from which the most powerful man in Tokyo's underworld could not escape. Legions of specialists, the finest minds in neurology from Geneva to Johns Hopkins, had passed through the doors of his penthouse clinic, their briefcases filled with theories and their faces etched with the ambition to solve the unsolvable. They spoke of atrophied nerves, of spinal lesions, of psychosomatic prisons. They prescribed, they prodded, they scanned, and they all failed. Each departure left behind only a deeper silence and the faint, cloying scent of antiseptic failure. His body, once a vessel of coiled, lethal power, was now a monument to their inadequacy, a marble statue confined to a throne of polished chrome and black leather. The city he commanded moved on without his stride, his orders delivered through the unwavering voice of his aide, his presence felt but never seen. For 2 decades, the world believed his legs were dead. They were wrong. The problem wasn't that his body couldn't move, it was that his mind wouldn't let it. And the one person who would finally understand this wasn't a doctor with a string of degrees, but a woman who cleaned the floors they walked on, a woman who saw the truth in the dust motes dancing in the afternoon light. Keep watching. The room was a testament to expensive sterility, a shrine to a problem money could manage, but not solve. Sunlight, thick and golden, streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating a space that felt less like a medical suite and more like a mausoleum. Every surface gleamed with a cold, impersonal polish, from the chrome legs of the examination table to the obsidian monolith of the doctor's desk. In the center of it all sat Ryota, his form silhouetted against the panoramic view of the sprawling city below. His stillness was profound, an anchor of immense gravity in the silent room. He wore a simple black yukata of the finest silk, its dark fabric a stark contrast to the clinical white that surrounded him. His hands, the only part of him that retained their articulate grace, rested on the arms of his wheelchair, fingers long and still. Beside him, a half-step back and always to the right, stood Masaru, his loyal shadow. Masaru's suit was impeccably tailored, his posture rigid, his face a mask of professional impassivity. He was an extension of his master's will, his eyes missing nothing, his presence a silent promise of order and consequence. In the corner, almost perfectly camouflaged by the quiet diligence of her work, a woman moved with a slow, rhythmic grace. Lena's light blue dress was faded from countless washings, a soft whisper of color in the monochromatic severity of the room. A crisp white apron was tied neatly at her waist. She wiped down the baseboards, her movements economical and fluid, her focus seemingly locked on the task of erasing any trace of imperfection. She was a ghost in this high-stakes world, a necessary but invisible functionary, her presence no more noted than the hum of the air filtration system. But Lena saw everything. She saw the minute tightening of the skin around Ryota's eyes when Dr. Finch entered the room. She saw the almost imperceptible shift in Masaru's weight, from neutral to guarded. And she saw the lie that lived in the heart of this pristine, silent prison. Lena's life had been stripped down to its barest essentials, a quiet existence pieced together in the wake of a loss that had scoured her world clean. She had once worn a different kind of uniform, the starched white of a physical therapist, her hands trained to understand the intricate language of muscle and nerve, to coax life back into limbs that had forgotten how to move. But that life, and the person she had been within it, felt like a story told about someone else. Now, her hands held rags and spray bottles, her expertise relegated to the silent observation of smudges and streaks. Yet the habit of seeing remained. Here, in this room that reeked of quiet despair, her old instinct stirred. She watched Dr. Alistair Finch, a man who carried himself with the unshakable confidence of his exorbitant fees. He was handsome in a severe, academic way, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his voice a smooth baritone that delivered pronouncements, not diagnoses. He spoke of Ryota's condition as one might speak of a rare, fascinating artifact he was privileged to curate. The neural pathways remain dormant, he would say, his fingers steepled. A classic case of conversion disorder, solidified over time into a physiological reality. "We must not agitate the system," to Lena, his words sounded rehearsed, a carefully constructed narrative designed to maintain the status quo. She watched Ryota during these pronouncements. He was a statue, yes, but even statues betray the stresses within them. She saw the faint tremor in his jaw, the barely there tension in his shoulders. This was not the placid resignation of a man at peace with his fate. This was the stillness of a man holding his breath against a scream that had been building for 20 years. She saw the wheelchair not as a medical necessity, but as a fortress, and Dr. Finch was its gatekeeper, diligently ensuring the walls remained impenetrable. One Tuesday afternoon, the sterile silence of the clinic was shattered. Lena, reaching for a fresh cloth on a high shelf, misjudged the distance. A heavy, galvanized steel bucket, filled with cleaning supplies, slipped from her grasp. It fell, tumbling end over end, and hit the polished concrete floor with a deafening, percussive clang that reverberated through the vast space like a gunshot. The sound was ugly, metallic, and violent. In the ensuing echo, something impossible happened. Ryota's body, the immutable centerpiece of the room, convulsed. It wasn't a gentle twitch or a minor spasm. His legs, the dead limbs that teams of experts had declared inert, kicked out with shocking, violent force, striking the underside of a glass table and sending a tremor through its frame. His back arched, his hands clenched into white-knuckled fists on the arms of his chair, and a raw, guttural sound was torn from his throat. The reaction was over as quickly as it began, leaving him gasping, his face pale and slick with a sudden sweat. Dr. Finch was on his feet instantly, his professional calm fracturing into irritation. "A misfiring of the peripheral nerves," he snapped, waving a dismissive hand as he retrieved a syringe from his cabinet. "A purely reflexive action, meaningless. The deep trauma can sometimes cause these electrical ghosts." Masaru, however, did not look at the doctor. His gaze was fixed on his master, his impassive mask cracking to reveal a flicker of stunned astonishment. But Lena saw what the others missed. She looked past the violent physical reaction to the expression in Ryota's eyes. It was not pain. It was not confusion. It was pure, undiluted terror, the look of an animal caught in a trap, a primal fear so potent it seemed to suck the very air from the room. And in that moment she knew. The sound of the falling bucket had not just startled him, it had unlocked something deep within him, a memory connected to the shriek of metal on metal. The incident planted a seed of inquiry in Lena's quiet mind. She began to see her mundane tasks as a series of potential experiments. She was no longer just a cleaner, she was an investigator in a light blue dress. A few days later, while polishing the chrome fixtures of a medical stand, she allowed a heavy stainless steel tray to slide from its perch. It clattered onto the floor with a high-pitched, ringing sound, a different timbre from the bucket but metallic all the same. She watched Ryota from the corner of her eye, her movements never faltering. She saw it again, the instantaneous tensing of his entire body, his knuckles turning white, a sharp, almost inaudible intake of breath. It was a smaller reaction, a micro-expression of the same core event, but it was undeniably there. She became a connoisseur of noise. The squeak of a cart's wheel, the scrape of a chair leg on the concrete, the snap of a binder clip. Each sound was a key, and she was testing the locks. Most did nothing, but anything sharp, metallic, or sudden drew a response, a tightening of the cage. Her actions, so small and seemingly accidental, did not go unnoticed. Masaru's gaze started to follow her. His attention, usually reserved for his master and any potential external threats, was now frequently directed to the woman polishing the windows. He observed the accidents, the recurring theme of metallic noise and the subtle, corresponding reactions in Ryota that Dr. Finch so readily dismissed. One evening, as Lena was packing her cart to leave, Masaru stepped into her path, his presence blocking the doorway. He was not threatening, but his stillness was absolute. "You are not clumsy," he stated, his voice low and even. It wasn't a question. Lena met his gaze, her heart beating a steady rhythm. She could have feigned ignorance, could have apologized and scurried away. Instead, she stood her ground. "No," she said, her voice soft but clear. "I'm not." A silent understanding passed between them. He did not press further, but stepped aside, his mind racing. For the first time, he began to question the narrative that had defined his master's life, and his own, for 2 decades. That night, Ryota's sleep was not a peaceful void, but a raging torrent. The sounds Lena had been methodically introducing had chipped away at the damn wall of his memory, and now the past came flooding back in a chaotic, terrifying deluge. He was no longer in his penthouse clinic. He was 28 years old again, driving on a rain-slicked mountain road. His wife, Aiko, was beside him, her laughter like the ringing of a small, perfect bell. His 5-year-old son, Hiro, was asleep in the back, his small face peaceful. The dream was vivid, intoxicatingly real. He could feel the smooth leather of the steering wheel, smell the rain-soaked cedar trees, hear the soft music playing on the radio. Then came the sound, the high-pitched, metallic screech. It started as a faint whine and grew into an all-consuming shriek as a logging truck, its brakes failed, came careening around a blind curve. The dream fractured. The idyllic scene shattered into a nightmare of twisting metal and breaking glass. The world turned upside down, a kaleidoscope of violence and noise. He felt the brutal impact, the crushing weight, the sudden, horrific silence that followed. In the dream, he tried to move, to turn, to reach for Aiko and Hiro. But his body would not respond. He was pinned, trapped, forced to witness the unspeakable stillness in the seats beside him. A single, overwhelming thought seared itself into his consciousness. If I don't move, this isn't real. If I stay perfectly still, it didn't happen. He awoke with a silent scream lodged in his throat, his body drenched in sweat, his legs rigid and cold as stone. The paralysis was not a prison, it was a sanctuary. It was the bargain his shattered mind had made to protect itself from a grief so monumental it threatened to annihilate him completely. Dr. Finch's medications, the endless cycle of sedatives and muscle relaxants, were not treatments. They were chains, reinforcing the walls of that sanctuary, ensuring he remained safely entombed within that single, frozen moment of impact. Masaru, prompted by the silent communication he'd shared with the cleaner, began his own quiet investigation. His loyalty to Ryota was absolute, a creed forged in years of service, but that loyalty was to the man, not to his condition. He accessed Dr. Finch's financial records through discreet channels, his actions swift and untraceable. What he found was not just a discrepancy, it was a carefully constructed empire. Dr. Finch's lavish lifestyle, his collection of vintage cars, his properties in Zurich and Monaco, his son's exorbitant tuition at an overseas university, was funded almost entirely by a single, inexhaustible source, the Ishikawa Syndicate's private medical fund. The payments were astronomical, justified by line items for experimental therapies, proprietary neurological equipment, and 24-hour specialist consultation. Finch had built a career, a reputation, and a vast fortune on the foundation of Ryota's immobility. A cure would not be a medical triumph for him, it would be a financial catastrophe. The doctor wasn't a healer, he was a warden, profiting from every moment his charge remained locked in his chair. The realization settled in Masaru's gut like a block of ice. He had been complicit, his unquestioning obedience facilitating the deception. He had mistaken meticulous care for genuine compassion. That evening, he sought out Lena as she was leaving. He waited for her in the sterile corridor, away from the cameras. "I believe you," he said, the words stripped of all artifice. "Tell me what you need." Lena looked at the man who was, by reputation, one of the most dangerous individuals in the city. She saw no threat in his eyes, only a desperate plea for a truth he was now ready to face. "I need to speak with him," she replied, her voice steady. "Alone." Without the doctor, Masaru gave a single, decisive nod. "I will arrange it." His allegiance had shifted. The doctor's reign was over. The following afternoon, Dr. Finch was called away to an urgent consultation, regarding a falsified overseas investment, a clever fiction engineered by Masaru. The moment his car cleared the private garage, Masaru escorted Lena into the main room. Ryota sat by the window, his expression as unchanging as the cityscape before him. He showed no surprise at her presence, his gaze distant. Lena did not approach him with the cautious deference of a nurse or the clinical detachment of a doctor. She pulled up a small stool and sat before him, meeting him at eye level. She held a small, polished steel ball in her hand, its surface reflecting the light. "Mr. Ishikawa," she began, her voice a calm anchor in the silent room. "We are taught that the body is a machine. When it breaks, a mechanic must fix it. But sometimes the body is a house. And it can become haunted." She paused, letting the words settle. Ryota's eyes, which had been staring through the window, slowly shifted to meet hers. For the first time, he was truly seeing her. "A sound can be a ghost," she continued softly. "It can rattle the windows and slam the doors, and make you so afraid that you lock yourself in a single room and refuse to come out." She held up the steel ball. "I am not here to fix you. I am just here to ask what you remember when you hear this sound." With that, she let the ball drop. It hit the concrete floor with a sharp, clear crack. The effect was electric. Ryota's body seized, his back arching, his hands gripping the chair. A low moan escaped his lips, a sound of pure anguish. His eyes were wide with a terror that was 20 years old. But this time Lena did not look away. She did not call for sedatives. She leaned closer. "Stay with it," she whispered, her voice firm but gentle. "Don't run from it. You are not on that road. You're here. You're safe. Stay with the feeling." Just for a moment. The door slid open with a soft hiss, and Dr. Finch strode in, his face a mask of thunderous fury. The urgent consultation had been a ruse, and he knew instantly he had been betrayed. He stopped dead, taking in the scene before him. The cleaner and nobody sitting before his patient, and Ryota in a state of extreme distress, his body trembling, his breathing ragged. The carefully maintained equilibrium of 2 decades was shattering before his eyes. "What is the meaning of this?" he boomed, his voice losing its smooth, therapeutic tone and taking on a raw, panicked edge. "Get away from him. You are agitating him, causing irreparable neurological damage." He moved toward his cabinet, his hand reaching for a loaded syringe of potent sedative, his ultimate tool of control. She's a cleaner. What could she possibly know about the complexities of psychosomatic trauma? But as he lunged forward, a solid form intercepted him. Masaru stepped between the doctor and the wheelchair, his body an immovable wall. He said nothing, but his eyes, cold and hard as river stones, conveyed a message more final than any threat. "You will not touch him," Masaru said, his voice quiet but laced with absolute authority. Dr. Finch sputtered, his face reddening. "This is my patient. I am responsible for his care." From the wheelchair, a sound emerged. It was a strangled, rasping noise, the sound of a voice unused to forming words of defiance. Ryota, fighting through the hurricane of memory and terror that Lena had unleashed, forced a single word past his lips. "No!" It was faint, but it resonated in the silent room with the force of a tectonic shift. He turned his head, his gaze locking with Lena's. In his eyes, the terror was still present, but now it was mingled with something new, a desperate, flickering ember of trust. He had chosen his path out of the haunted room. With Dr. Finch escorted from the premises by a grimly satisfied Masaru, the true work began. It was not a miracle. It was an exorcism, slow and agonizing. Lena did not have a cure. She had a key. Day after day, she sat with Ryota, not as a therapist, but as a guide. She used sensory triggers, reintroducing the sounds not to shock him, but to slowly, painstakingly disconnect them from the reflexive terror. She would drop the steel ball, and as his body seized, she would talk him through it, her calm voice a lifeline in the storm of his memory. "Feel the floor beneath your chair," she would say. "Feel the warmth of the sun on your hands. That sound is here, in this room. It is not there, on that road." She helped him rebuild the memory, not as a chaotic, terrifying assault, but as a linear story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. She encouraged him to speak of it, to give voice to the grief he had held in silence for 2 decades. He spoke of Aiko's laugh, of the way Hiro's small hand felt in his. And for the first time since that day, Ryota Ishikawa wept. The tears were a flood, washing away the frozen landscape of his grief. He mourned the family he had lost and the life he had abandoned. In the midst of this profound catharsis, as the emotional dam finally broke, something else happened. He felt a flicker, a tiny, nascent impulse in his right hand. He focused on it, channeling all his will into that single point. His index finger, which had been still for 20 years, twitched. It was a barely perceptible movement, but to the 2 people in that room, it was an earthquake. The fortress was not just breached, it was beginning to crumble from the inside out. The ghost was finally being evicted from the house. 6 months later, the sterile penthouse clinic was gone, its medical equipment sold, its cold surfaces replaced with warm wood and soft textures. The space was no longer a prison, but a home. In the center of a rooftop garden, surrounded by meticulously raked sand and the quiet strength of bonsai trees, Ryota stood. He leaned on a simple, darkwood cane, his posture still stiff, his movements deliberate, but he was on his own 2 feet. The sunlight warmed his face, and a gentle breeze stirred the leaves of a Japanese maple. Masaru stood a respectful distance away, his suit replaced by more casual attire, the rigid lines of his posture softened by a quiet relief that was almost joy. His loyalty had been rewarded not with power or money, but with the return of the man he had sworn to serve. Lena was there, too. She wore a simple linen dress the color of the evening sky. She was no longer an employee, her light blue uniform and apron a relic of a past that seemed a lifetime away. She was a companion, a confidant, the architect of his resurrection. There was a quiet, comfortable space between them, filled with an understanding that required no words. He turned to her, the movement slow, measured. A faint, unpracticed smile touched his lips. "The air feels different," he said, his voice still raspy from disuse but clear and strong. "When you are standing up," she returned his smile, a genuine warmth lighting up her features. "It is," she agreed softly. "It's the same air. You are just closer to the sky." In the quiet of the garden, they were not the feared Oyabun and the invisible cleaner. They were simply a man and a woman, 2 fractured souls who had found in each other the missing pieces, proving that the deepest prisons are the ones we build for ourselves, and that sometimes the key is held by the most unlikely of hands.